This presentation will cover some of the aspects related to emergency vehicle operations that you as a new officer should know. Police officers perform three different types of driving: non-emergency driving, emergency driving, and pursuit driving. No matter what type of driving, the legal standard police officers must always drive with is due regard for the safety of all motorists. During non-emergency driving, an officer is treated like all private citizens and must obey all traffic laws. A vehicle's emergency equipment is not a substitute for careful driving. There are limitations in driving, both related to the driver and the vehicle. With regards to the driver, limitations, you have driver's vision, hearing, reflexes, health, overconfidence, attitude, and emotions. Limitations involving the vehicle are brakes, tires, suspension, steering, engine, lights, wipers, and a restraint system. Officers should inspect their assigned vehicle to attempt to recognize any mechanical issues and get them corrected. Issues such as fuel, oil, wipers, and wiper fluid, emergency lights and siren, the public address system, seat belts, any loose items in the passenger compartment that may need fixed, tire pressure, tire tread, make sure headlights and taillights are functional, and any damage to the vehicle. Of the driver limitations listed previously, emotions, or being emotional, have a big effect while driving. When a person is emotional, the ability to think, reason, and make judgments is affected. The person is typically focused not just on the emotion itself, but the reason for the emotion. Therefore, the person does not always pay attention to what is going on around or a job task, and in this case, driving. Some negative emotional effects can include observation or seeing, such as things ahead or around you while driving. Have you ever been told that someone saw you and waved, but you didn't wave back? Maybe it was because you were distracted or not paying attention due to something going on. A delay in interpreting events. Have you ever been driving, had something happen, but it took you a moment to realize what had happened? The ability to predict or recognize hazards. If you're not focused on what's ahead, you may not see a hazard, such as something in the roadway or something being in front of you. The ability to make high-risk decisions. The ability to perform time skills, changing lanes, turning, acceleration, and braking, just to name a few of those skills. Therefore, as an officer, the ability to control your emotions is very important for your job, but especially when it comes to driving. Whether driving or riding as a passenger, police officers should wear the seat belt while in a police vehicle. Wearing the seat belt prevents the officer from striking the steering wheel or windshield in the event of a crash. Also prevents the officer from being ejected out of the vehicle. It prevents injury, which is assisted by wearing the ballistic vest, and that can help reduce medical costs as well as time off the job. Wearing a seatbelt can also prevent disciplinary action by following departmental policy, standard operating procedure, and especially state law compliance. But more importantly, wearing the seatbelt is also a role model to the community. There are 6 elements of defensive driving: attitude, aggressiveness, impatience, etc., knowledge, motor vehicle laws, vehicle dynamics, attentiveness, thinking of other things while driving, or distractions while driving, whether that be from inside or outside of the vehicle, foresight, long-range foresight, which includes vehicle equipment inspections, advanced planning, route selection, immediate foresight, intersections, other traffic, pedestrians, things that can happen immediately while driving. Judgment, recognize alternatives if something should happen. And skills, backing up a vehicle or manipulating the vehicle in a desired manner, which takes practice. One aspect of driving that seems to be underestimated by drivers in general is route selection. However, route selection should be given priority by emergency responders in order to respond to runs quickly, more efficiently, and safely. Emergency responders should practice route selection during non-emergency situations when there is less stress, so that when an emergency does occur, selecting the route will be much easier. Speed of the vehicle should always be a secondary consideration over selecting the route. There are several factors to consider when selecting a route to take to an emergency situation. Heavy or slow traffic, such as vehicle traffic in urban areas, or large vehicles in rural areas, such as farm equipment. Heavy pedestrian traffic, things such as special events, fairs, schools, school events, and things like that. Construction zones, roads with poor visibility, such as multiple hills or curves, especially blind curves. One-way streets, so try to select routes that don't have multiple one-way streets where you may have to go the wrong way or are not able to go on that street. The day of the week, as well as the time of day. Late night hours may be easier to navigate compared to early morning or afternoon when schools are letting out or people are going to work. Intersections, such as those with four-way stop signs or stop lights and so forth. GPS is not always the best option because GPS may not display short-term road closures, or the signal may fail and roads may not be updated with construction, new streets, and so forth. Taking a few moments at the beginning when getting a run to select the best route could save time in the overall response. Officers should know your jurisdiction and practice good route selection on a daily basis that assures your safe arrival. An intersection is the location officers are most frequently injured or killed during emergency and pursuit driving. When approaching an intersection, officers should attempt to enter the intersection from either the left or the center of the roadway. Motorists are supposed to yield to emergency vehicles by pulling to the right. However, this does not always occur. Therefore, officers should be prepared to react accordingly. Officers should slow and be prepared to stop until such time that all lanes are confirmed clear and safe before proceeding. Intersections should be cleared lane by lane. Due regard is the legal standard, but it is not abdicated or given up simply due to activation of emergency lights and siren. Being liable for a crash is a separate issue from being able to prevent a crash. In other words, an officer may not be legally liable for the crash at an intersection, but the crash may have been deemed preventable by the officer using departmental guidelines. Some common mistakes or errors made by police officers when clearing intersections include passing on the right side of vehicles instead of passing on the left or into oncoming traffic, not clearing all lanes of travel through the intersection, assuming other motorists will stop, and excessive speed through the intersection. Police officers should remember, other motorists must be given notice to react to an approaching emergency vehicle. Factors such as view being blocked, the driver being distracted, or not hearing the siren and other factors affect the motorist's reaction to an approaching emergency vehicle. IC code 92118 defines when an emergency vehicle may operate with lights and siren. Under letter A, responding to an emergency call, in the pursuit of an actual or suspected violator of the law, or responding to but not upon returning from a fire alarm. The statute goes on to list what an emergency vehicle may do during operation of the vehicle, such as, under letter B, park or stand, notwithstanding other provisions of this article, proceed past a red or stop signal or stop sign, but only after slowing down as necessary for safe operation. Exceed the maximum speed limits if the person who drives the vehicle does not endanger life or property. Disregard regulations governing direction of movement or turning in specified directions. Execute a lawful intervention technique if the person has completed a training course that instructs participants in the proper execution of lawful intervention techniques. Officers should pay close attention to Section D of the statute. Section D states, this section does not do the following: relieve the person who drives an authorized emergency vehicle from the duty to drive with due regard for the safety of all persons. Protect the person who drives an authorized emergency vehicle from the consequences of the person's reckless disregard for the safety of others. Civil lawsuits or liability that come about as a result of emergency driving attempt to determine if an injury came from an officer's negligence. Lawsuits can stem from the different types of driving situations: non-emergency driving, emergency driving, an intentional act in a pursuit, or an agency's failure to provide adequate training. However, ultimately, you, as the officer behind the wheel, are responsible for your actions. The burden of proof in a civil lawsuit is preponderance of the evidence, which is at 51%, or in basic terms, which side is more believable. In legal terms, there are three types of liability which will be discussed. There's direct liability, vicarious liability, and municipal liability. Direct liability means the officer's negligence or even an intentional wrongdoing directly caused an injury. The burden is based on what is reasonable. The definition of reasonable: 1, able to reason; 2, amendable to reason; 3, using or showing reason or sound judgment or sensible; and 4, not extreme, immoderate, or excessive, as well as not expensive. Vicarious liability: a supervisor or other officer cannot, with impunity, allow a subordinate to whom a duty of supervision is owed to commit constitutional violations or take part in the unconstitutional behavior either through direct participation or ratification. Impunity means free from punishment. In other words, a supervisor can be punished if a subordinate commits a violation. So in other words, someone else is held responsible for the action or actions of another, such as supervisors, senior officers, training officers, and instructors. Municipal liability. With municipal liability, the plaintiff must show that the injury was caused by an employee of a municipality due to negligent policies, practices, or training. The mere employment of an officer will not necessitate this type of liability. The plaintiff must show a policy of the municipality was the moving force behind the injury by showing there were no real guidelines, inadequate training, or the policy itself is flawed. For example, a city had a knowledge of officers' reckless speeding. The city had a, quote, de facto policy, end quote, of encouraging reckless driving by its officers. Some officers had documented driving of 20 to 50 miles per hour over the posted speed limit. The agency instructed officers not to drive that fast, but no officer was ever disciplined or required to take remedial training for violations. The court ruled if the municipality has knowledge of poor conduct but does not correct it, then the municipality is liable. Reminder: authorized driving procedures for a person driving an authorized emergency vehicle does not do the following: relieve that person who drives an authorized emergency vehicle from the duty to drive with due regard for the safety of all persons operating on the roadway, or protect that person who drives an authorized emergency vehicle from the consequences of that person's reckless disregard for the safety of others. All officers are reminded again to drive with due regard and to be safe. Here are some of the differences between emergency driving and pursuit driving. In an emergency driving situation, typically the officer is responding to a run, able to decide the route to take to get to that run, controls the car speed, controls the approach to the run upon arrival, and controls what type of response appropriate to the run. During a pursuit, however, the officer is chasing a violator. The violator controls the route. The violator controls the speed of the pursuit. There tends to be more emotions both on the side of the violator and the officer. The officer must make split-second critical decisions, analyze changing conditions, and ultimately the officer has little or no control over the pursuit. The responsibility for the decision to pursue and the method to be employed rests with the individual officer and the agency policy. There is no exact method by which a suspect should be apprehended. However, prime consideration should be given to the safety and legal obligations officers have to the public. Officers simply cannot put citizens' lives at stake. The legal definition of a pursuit is an attempt by a peace officer in an emergency vehicle in emergency mode trying to apprehend a person in another motor vehicle who is willfully failing to stop. Considerations to be made before initiating a pursuit are: do I know and understand my agency's pursuit policy? What is the reason for the pursuit? Is it a traffic violation? Is it a criminal act? And if so, what level? Misdemeanor, felony? What are the environmental conditions? What type of condition is the police vehicle I'm driving in? And then my own limitations. What is my physical? Am I sick or feeling well? What is my mental status? What's my driving ability? And you don't know how dangerous the suspect or suspects are. Some pursuit tactics and safety factors that could be utilized are, for radio and communications, always use short, precise sentences. No need to use long, drawn-out sentences. Use plain English. Not all agencies use 10 codes or signals. A pursuit may cross multiple jurisdictions. so if in doubt, use plain English. Identify yourself on the radio. Don't just hit in without telling who you are. What's the description of the fleeing vehicle? Color, make, model, license plate, etc. Most importantly, what is your current location? When traveling, call out the direction of travel, north, south, east, west, as well as the road name. How many occupants are in the vehicle? And again, what was the reason for the initial attempt to stop the vehicle? On a following distance, initially when attempting to make the stop, use what's called or referred to as a pressure tactic. You may stay close to the car you're attempting to stop, but only do so for a short time. If the vehicle does not stop and continues, then you need to back off. The reason for that is so you leave yourself enough time to react should the violator or the suspect perform an unsafe act. Always leave yourself an out. Maintain optimum line of sight. Do not lose the car out of your sight for more than just a few seconds. Remember, you must slow or stop at all intersections. The violator may or may not, but you should. As the pursuit continues, evaluate the reasonableness of the chase. Is the risk greater than the reward or vice versa? A uniform statewide pursuit policy. The Law Enforcement Training Board adopted statewide minimum standards for vehicle pursuits pursuant to IC Code 5219. The uniform statewide policy on vehicle pursuits must be incorporated into policies, procedures, rules, and/or general orders of all Indiana law enforcement agencies, offices, and departments as of January 1st of 2023. These standards should already be included in your agency's policy. The importance of a pursuit policy. A policy defines what is expected from officers. Policy limits officers' exposure to danger. Policy reduces the officer's risk of liability as long as the policy is followed. However, the policy must include aspects of street reality and not just what is common practice. You must know and understand your agency's pursuit policy. Remember, at the end of the day, the number one goal for officers is to drive safely with due regard so they can stay safe and go home at the end of their shift.